The following is a Shaw TV Public Affairs presentation. Constituency Report is produced as a public service by members of the BC Legislature through the facilities of Shaw TV.
Welcome to Constituency Report. I'm here with Andrew Weaver, MLA for Oak Bay Gordon Head and leader of the third party. Our report is in two parts today. The first part is an update with Andrew Weaver, and the second part is a conversation with Kayla Phillips, legislative intern for the BC Green Caucus. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Judy.
Want to start off today with the topic of childcare, and there were substantive investments in childcare announced in the budget. And are you satisfied with the direction that the government is going in this regard? And does this vision for affordable, quality, sustainable childcare, does that mesh with the BC Green vision?
Yeah, we're very pleased and quite delighted, actually, the direction the government's taking with respect to childcare and more than that, early childhood education. You know, when we campaigned in the last election, we were able to find $4 billion over 4 years to invest in childcare, recognizing that it's important to give kids a head start, to put in place measures to assist parents who want to go to work, to have adequate access to not just childcare, but actually quality education for their children. The government's taken a long-term perspective over 10 years. They started off by pushing for more spaces. Well, clearly, capacity, childcare spaces is a real problem. They're pushing towards more licensing, and they're pushing towards more funding for those who require or need or want childcare. Some of the stuff we thought were missing is not everybody chooses to actually use childcare, and one of the things that we brought in our platform is up to $500 per month allowance for people who choose to look after their children at home, and other things we want to look for as we discuss the rollout of this plan more is that a recognition that in fact in Indigenous communities there's a different type of expectations on childcare. You know, one size may not fit all, and in fact frankly doesn't fit all. We're hoping to see childcare move out of the Ministry of MCFD, Ministry of Children and Family Development, into the Ministry of Education. We'd love to see that, because really we should be viewing this as education, not just babysitting, because when children are young, it's their formative years, and we want to see real steps taken to ensure that wages are increased. Now, it's troubling when we tend to pay childcare workers, early childhood educators, not much more above minimum wage. And what does that say as a society? It's telling us that we don't value, looking after and the educating of our youngest children. And it doesn't make sense, because these children are in their most vulnerable years, and we really should be trying to get the best and brightest and most nurturing people at that time. And the final thing we want to see is recognition that in some families, my wife's Greek, my mother's Ukrainian, particularly certain ethnic groups, is that it is a social norm for the grandparents to actually look after the children. It's not everybody, but you could recognize that in a taxable benefit or tax credit way. So we're hoping to move this forward, but we're delighted with the first steps that have been taken. It ensures that people who need childcare get childcare in a timely fashion.
Mm-hmm. And on to the housing crisis. The NDP government is taking steps to deal with the crisis, as has been outlined in their 30-point housing plan. And the BC Green Caucus has also recently released a policy document on housing priorities, calling for bold action. Are the steps being taken by government addressing the real housing problem?
Well, this is the problem, is we're quite disappointed with the approach the BC NDP have taken. As you mentioned, Judy, about a little over a month ago, the BC Green Caucus, we released what we call the Bold Action, Seeking Bold Action Housing Plan. We outline a number of steps here that we wanted to see to get a grip on the problem that we know exists. Now, our response to the BC and to our characterization of the BC NDP's response to this is it's tepid. It's a tepid response to a call for bold action. So what have they done? Number one, they've extended the foreign buyers tax from, which is now just in the Vancouver area, to outside of Vancouver, to Nanaimo, to Victoria region, and to Kelowna. Well, this is a whack-a-mole response, right? So you're just moving it to a few jurisdictions. You're not actually, dealing with the structural problem. We know, for example, that if there's a foreign buyer who wants to invest in Victoria now, it's going to look much more attractive to go up to the Cowichan Valley, which is just a few kilometers north. And so this whack-a-mole approach isn't the way we would have seen it. We think that the BC NDP have botched the speculation tax. What we wanted to see and what we wanted to see done was a outright following of the New Zealand model, which is to say that right now we have a crisis. And when you have a crisis, you need bold action. Bold action means we need to put a clamp on the market. And that clamp we wanted to target is the flow of offshore money into our market. We all know of the myriad examples of offshore money flowing into particularly Vancouver, but other real estate markets. And what's happening now, say in the west side of Vancouver, in the Point Grey area, is you're finding communities that are vacant or people are selling their homes and cashing in, and they might move to Victoria or Kelowna. And what's a couple of $1 million in Victoria if you sell your home for $6 million? So we wanted to see right up front, follow the New Zealand model. If you live, you pay taxes here, you may be a Canadian citizen or landed immigrant posted elsewhere, fill your boots. We encourage you to own property. To follow the New Zealand model, we also encourage investment in new development. But existing capital stock, we were hoping there would be an outright ban on the ability of people outside of Canada from doing it. Now, why the NDP have messed up, in my view, on the speculation tax is they're targeting, essentially it's a form of a vacancy tax, but it also applies to Canadians. Now, we know in Victoria, for example, that there's a lot of snowbirds who have a place here or maybe in Nanaimo and in Kelowna. In Kelowna it's more for the summer, but here they come to Victoria in the winter. Why do they come in the winter? They might be living in Regina or Saskatoon and retire there. Well, because it's warmer here, and it's not as cold and not as slippery or dangerous. So the speculation tax would target these people. We know that there's others who have like homes in, say, ski resorts, and it's targeting those too. So and it seemed misplaced. So what we would have liked to have seen is this focus on the problem. The problem is the flow of offshore money into our province. There's 7.5 billion people in the world. 4.6 million in BC. There's a lot of capital in the world that's looking for a safe haven to park, and our real estate is being viewed as that safe haven. The NDP missed in a bunch of others. They talk about this 30 points. Well, they actually aren't closing loopholes, for example. They're allowing foreign purchasing of ALR. This is creating quite serious issues in large parts of British Columbia. One example, we had an entourage from northern BC come and see the Green Caucus when we were at the last Union of BC Municipalities conference. They were concerned that thousands of hectares were bought up by a corporate entity from an offshore country, and to produce hay. Now, the hay was not being produced for domestic consumption. It was being wrapped and shipped afar. So what are the consequences? Local farmers can't get land. Land prices go up. They can't get access to hay. Hay prices go up. And this is wrong. So again, NDP are not covering that. The Bare Trust loophole, another problem, right? Right now, they've increased the property transfer tax for homes over $3 million to 5%. And above for higher than that. Well, anybody who's going to be buying a $3 million home is going to avoid paying any property transfer tax, because all you do is you put the house in a trust, and rather than sell the house, you have the trust owned by a corporation, and you sell shares in the corporation, because in BC, we tax the transfer of title. We do not tax the transfer of beneficial ownership. It's a simple fix. The NDP knew what the problem is. I've been raising it for 4 years now. In the legislature, they called for the Liberals to fix it. Ontario closed that loophole. They taxed transfer of beneficial ownership. In BC, we don't. And what is the NDP response? It's to study it some more. Well, that's just not good enough. So we're quite disappointed in the plan. It's really tinkering around the edges, and the only thing that's is a little small school tax, which for homes over $3 million. Again, it's not dealing with the problem. It's as if you know what the disease is, but rather than dealing with the disease, you have some infection in your body and it's causing sores to pop up everywhere. Rather than treat the infection, you're treating the sores. foreign buyers tax in Victoria. Where next? Nelson? Where after that? Kelowna? Deal with the problem. We need it's a crisis. Put in bold measures now, as we articulate here, and then in a couple of years revisit to see if the policies have had the effect we hope they would, which is to make it such that people in British Columbia who live and work here, who will work here, can actually live here.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've seen changes to the medical services plan, including a 50% reduction in premiums that took effect January 1st, 2018, and the elimination of MSP is promised to take place by 2020. You've been calling for the elimination of MSP premiums for several years now, and now an employer's health tax is being introduced on businesses with a payroll over $500,000. How would the BC Greens have handled the elimination of MSP premiums?
Right. So we are obviously we're supportive of eliminating MSP premiums. The MSP premium is a regressive form of taxation. It's a one-size-fit-all. Everyone pays the same amount, whether you earn $60,000 or $600 million a year. It's got to be fixed. And recall that this issue was brought to us by a seniors group in Monterey Centre who raised this as an issue a number of years back that we've been working on since then. Now, the BC Liberals in last year during the election campaign announced that they would cut the MSP premium in half. And they were just going to cut it in half, and it came from general revenues. And it was done and maintained by the BC NDP. That's fine. Several $billion of lost income. The BC NDP then said they've committed to actually eliminate the MSP premium by 2020. The problem is they've botched this up. Why did they botch it up? Well, the first thing they did, and they campaigned on, is to say that they wanted to create an MSP task force to make recommendations to government as to how they could best recoup the revenue that is being lost when they eliminate MSP. And so that in November the 2nd of last year, that task force was constructed. They busy doing their work, and along comes government and announces that they're going to add in an employer's health tax. Well, the report from the committee doesn't get tabled till March 31st. So it's a little odd that we're waiting for a report the government's already decided on. And they've botched this because what they've done is they put the entire burden of the funds on employers, rather than recognizing the approach we were going to take, which is to mirror what Ontario did, is to recognize that there needs to be a sharing here and to have a progressive amount. For example, in Ontario, if you're an individual who earns just over $200,000, you pay $900 a year. If you're earning under $20,000, you pay $0. And there's a graduated amount between them. This is putting it all on employers, and it's doing so above a fixed level. I mean, there's a number of problems with here. Why 500,000? It's putting a barrier for growth from businesses to grow above, $500,000 a year, because as soon as you go from 490 to 505, you're paying a healthcare premium and corporate income tax rate. So that's kind of, we don't like that type of approach to taxation for a start. But there's other problems as well too. Is that the fact is that we know that many employers have, for unions, negotiated it as a benefit. Now that's fine if it's a negotiated benefit, and we understand that the government wanted to realize that had to be reflected in any changed healthcare funding. So what they've done though is, rather than have a shared amount between employees and employer, they're throwing it all on the employer. So those who've negotiated it as a benefit, now their employers have to actually pay an awful lot more, and that's going to hurt schools. It's going to hurt hospitals, and let's not kid ourselves. Every municipality is going to be hit, and we're going to see it on our property taxes as well. So I think they botched up the implementation. It was a great way to move forward. We outlined a way we could have done it in a progressive way, following the Ontario model. They did not wait for the committee to report the task force, and they wrecked an otherwise good news story. Hopefully, it's not going to come to force till 2020. Legislation will appear in the fall, and hopefully we'll have time to get some changes to this in the upcoming months.
And Andrew, on Kinder Morgan, how do you think the government is doing on this file?
I think they're doing very well on this file. This was very unfortunate that the BC Liberals literally paid politics in it, and then Mr. Trudeau federally doubled down on the politics. You know, as you know, I participated as an intervener in the NEB process. The process, without any doubt, was a box-ticking exercise. I felt it was a complete waste of my time, but I felt I had to follow through. Many people quit. You know, I summarize, for example, the entire oil spill response was predicated on the existence of 20 hours of sunlight. Of course, there's no latitude south of Tuktoyaktuk that has 20 hours of sunlight. So it's in any day in the year. So it was a problem. Trudeau campaigned and said, you know what, we got to fix this. And so he has. They've eliminated that NEB process, and for other proposals, it's going to be done differently. Well, that's a bit of a problem here. And we had some horse trading going on. And what was the horse trading? Trudeau realized that he wanted to deal with Miss Notley, not Mr. Kenny in Alberta. And he realized he needed a strong Alberta government there, and he needed to give them a win. But, you know, to give him a win, he had to give him a pipeline to coast. So you do the calculation. Why not Energy East? Well, Energy East is going to go through Quebec. And there's a lot of Liberal seats there, and heaven forbid we upset Quebec, the Québécois, over this issue, because we'll lose a bunch of seats. Let's go through BC and throw BC under the bus, because we're going to probably gain a few seats in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and we'll lose all our seats in BC, but we'll still be able to continue forward. You know, there's refineries on the east coast of Canada that are importing heavy oil from Venezuela. If we're going to have pipelines, new pipelines, they should be being fed with BC oil. It didn't happen. You know, again, there is some promising developments as Alberta is starting to talk about refining more, increasing their refining capacity locally. But as it stands, I think that the present government, BC NDP, have lived up to their promises to use every tool in the toolbox to do what they can to stop this. Multiple courts. We've got the conditions that are being put forward in terms of you know, what needs to be done in terms of getting approval. And I look forward. Honestly, I don't think this pipeline will ever get built. The price of oil, $60 a barrel. We've got Total, Statoil, Shell, and others have pulled out of the oil sands because it's the most expensive oil in the world to actually extract. And we know that jurisdictions like in Middle East are dumping oil in the market because they recognize that the world is moving away from fossil fuels. So better to get money and value for your easy conventional oil and gas now than try to be left out. So I don't think it's going to be built.
Thank you. And finally, for this portion of our program, I want to ask you about intergenerational equity, which is something that you often refer to. So for you, what are the key issues that affect intergenerational equity?
Well, the single most important thing, I would argue, is that politicians and decision makers of today think not only about what's going to happen in the next year or 4 years, but also about the long-term consequences of their decisions. So to me, it's why I got into politics. As you know, I couldn't sit there, you know, talking at students and telling them about climate change and saying, you know, if you care about this issue, you've got to own it and vote because it's an issue that'll affect you, not my generation. And at some point I felt like, you know, I should step up and practice what I preached. So intergenerational equity is critical to me. It's doing things that aren't there just, they're doing things what's right as opposed to doing things just to get reelected. You know, we just celebrated the life of an incredible politician in Canada, David Barrett, who epitomized exactly the type of leadership that one wants when you start to talk about intergenerational equity. He recognized in the decisions he made, Tommy Douglas did, that decisions of today needed to be made because they're the right thing to do, not because they get you reelected. And the legacy of him and Tommy Douglas and others are all around us. So that's what we're looking for, and that's why that's important.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
That concludes the first part of our program. And please stay with us for Constituency Report when Andrew will interview our legislative intern, Kayla Phillips.
Welcome back to Constituency Report. In this second half, we'll take a little different avenue here. I'm going to talk with Kayla Phillips, who's a legislative intern working with the BC Green Caucus down in the legislature here. Hello, Kayla.
Hello, Andrew.
Tell us what brought you to the legislature. What are you studying at Simon Fraser, and what made you think about applying to be an intern?
Right, so at Simon Fraser University, I graduated last June with an honors degree in political science and gender, sexuality, and women's studies. I started my master's in political science at SFU in the fall, but before that I actually found out that I'd be doing this program. So it's open to any university student in BC who graduated in the last 2 years. And basically it just seemed like an unbelievable opportunity. Not only do we get to work with a party in the caucus, we also spend time in a ministry. I got to spend time in the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions.
Oh, cool.
And that was able to give me kind of a perspective on working for both the government and a different party, which I think will be pretty invaluable whether I end up being a professor, a politician, or anything else.
So you apply in about February of last year, you found out, or February, March? Or
yeah, so I found out last February that I'd be starting here this January, so it's a very long process.
Right, and so you started your master's in September or May?
I started in September 2017.
Okay.
So
what's your master's on, out of interest?
I look broadly at women in Canadian politics, specifically provincial politics, but I'm actually hoping to study whether it's better to have a certain issue such as a women's ministry or environmental ministries as their own kind of siloed issue, or whether it's better to have them as a pervasive issue throughout all of government.
That's interesting you raised that, because my background, of course, is climate science, and when Gordon Campbell recognized that this was an issue he wanted to do, what he did was create a climate action secretariat, but it was embedded in the Premier's office and it spanned every minister rather than putting it in environment. So it'd be interesting to know where you end up taking your research. I want to talk about youth in politics. Why is it so critical for young people to be engaged in our democracy? What views do you have on that?
Right, so it's easy for me and the people I hang out with who are total politics nerds to say
poli-sci students,
to say that it's important for young people to be engaged in politics. But for the most part, that's not true at all. We know that young people don't vote at anywhere near the same rates as people in older generations. And it's really important that they do, because the issues that happen today, as you talked about earlier with intergenerational equity, are going to affect them much more than it will older voters who typically come out in much larger numbers. So I hear time and again that people are hopeless. People my age don't even want to have kids because they're not sure what world will be left over for them when their kids do get to even our age. So there's a general feeling of hopelessness that kind of pervades the political landscape for people my age, which I think can only really be addressed by them engaging in politics and upping their own participation. Though, of course, I think that's also something that political parties and politicians have a responsibility for, because so often the things that they are marketing to try to get reelected or elected in the first place are not something that's really going to be interesting to people my age. So we have university tuition that's getting out of control. It's super expensive. People can't even find somewhere to rent, never mind to buy. And they're being priced out of the cities that they love. So I think that not only do young people need to be more engaged, but there needs to be something for them to engage with for that to happen.
One of the things I would ask in classes, I used to teach at University of Victoria, I'd ask in my climate society class, how many of you need a hip or knee replacement? And occasionally a skier would put up their hand, but invariably no one would do that. And the example I like to build on with this is say, well, look, 70 to 80% of people over the age of 65 vote. If I campaign to reduce hip and knee replacement lineups, I know that this is a very big issue for seniors. I know I can throw some money at it and deal with it by the next election and say, vote me back in. So it's I think that example fits into to what you're saying. It is important, and I don't know what more we can do. Do you have any ideas about, like, as somebody who and a party really that tried to cater to have intergenerational equity front and center? What more can we do? Like you mentioned, parties could do more to target youth. How do we inspire them to actually vote? Is proportional representation relevant to youth, or do they not really care about that? It's inside baseball. Do you have any specific ideas?
Well, I think proportional representation is a big part of that, because a big factor is feeling as if your vote doesn't matter no matter what. So having that feeling as though every vote will make a difference, and we know that in some cases every vote does make a difference, but in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't seem that way. So I do think PR will help in some aspects, But I think it also comes down to education and getting kids interested at a really young age. A lot of the classes, maybe in high school, maybe they could have their curriculum updated so that it includes more real-world examples. I know you talk about lowering the voting age
What do you think
to
of that?
16. I think that'd be a great idea because, well, when you're already kind of captured in this landscape where you're super engaged in politics, you're finding out what it means to be engaged as a citizen, what better way than to jump right into that as you are in that environment, because then you're going to start voting, you're going to be interested in voting, and you're going to kind of have your teeth already sunk in before you even get out into the world.
An experiential learning experience.
Exactly. I think another aspect is actually listening to people who are younger. I'm really struck in the Green Caucus by how young overall the staffers are.
Yeah.
And I think that provides a really important perspective because you have people directly in the office who are providing their perspective. I don't know if that's true for all parties, but I think that just generally being able to listen to younger people will also be able to address issues that are important to them as well.
Well, thanks. Could you tell us a little bit about what you're working on in particular, and if there's any relationship between your interest in university as well as what you're working on now in our caucus?
Well, I would consider myself really lucky because for someone doing their master's...
We're really lucky to have someone like you working with us. so.
Wow. For someone who's interested in doing their master's work on basically feminist politics, and then to be told that there's someone in this office who will support you in working on exactly what you're interested in, it's basically a dream come true. So I've been helping Sonia First-to-Know a lot with a lot of things that she's been working on.
She's amazing.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
And one of the particular projects that I'll be working on in the long term is engaging with BC universities and colleges to find out how the implementation of their sexual violence and assault policies are going.
Could you tell us a little bit of the history of that? I mean, well, maybe I could fill in, is that about two years ago now, the government, Liberal of the day government of the time, committed to introduce a variant of a private member's bill to require post-secondary institutions across BC to implement develop policies for dealing with sexualized violence and misconduct. So you're going to be engaging student groups, or how, tell me more about what you're planning to do to see whether it's been implemented or not.
Right. So far I've emailed about 100 different...
100?
Yeah, groups, community organizations, student societies,
Wow.
bodies who have been set up specifically to deal with these policies on campus. I know that SFU and UBC both have a specific office now to deal with these kind of situations. So I've been getting a lot of feedback so far. A lot of people are taking this really seriously and have already been thinking about exactly what they would like to give this feedback. They just didn't know where to give it to.
Really?
So,
oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, I'm
when
finding...
people feel heard, that there's an avenue.
Exactly.
You know, were you there? We had Capilano, one of the students actually at Capilano University, raise this issue because they wanted to know how they would get feedback a while ago. What's your long-term plans, out of interest? Yeah.
Well, at some point, I'll be finishing my master's degree. I like to tell people that I'd like to do the Andrew Weaver route. You know,
what's that?
I like to be a professor and then be a politician. Use all that knowledge that I get in academia and then apply that to a more political setting.
So you're thinking of a PhD somewhere?
At some point,
Yeah,
maybe a little in the future.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a long journey. It's well worth it, but you know, it's very rewarding being in university. It keeps you young too. You know, the good thing about university is that you may age, but everyone in your class stays exactly the same age every single year. So it actually keeps you young at heart because it keeps you, you know, abreast of what the issues facing the next generation are. So anyway, so thank you again for being an intern. There's two. We've also got Alex McGowan, of course, who's from Kwantlen Polytechnic University. There, you're from Simon Fraser, and it's the first time we've had interns in well, it's the first time we had a caucus, and it's just wonderful to be able to work with you and Alex. And you've been participating in so many things, whether it be from helping with statements, questions, research, etc. So thanks again, Kayla, and thank you for joining me on Constituency Report today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Constituency Report.